see it. All right. So I'm going to be speaking about medicine and military in traditional China, specifically on space, boundary, and cognate vocabulary, which is really looking at kind of a socio-cultural dynamic of how these different parts of the East Asian tradition are related. So this is really, kind of revolves around an idea of what's applied versus abstract thought. So all philosophy seeks some application in the world, inevitably, but there's a divide between more abstract approaches like Confucianism, Taoism, Moism, which is with the Mozi, right? These different ones that are more abstract and can't really be measured so well, and the more practical approaches like both the military tradition and the medical tradition. So the abstract approach posits an ideal. It needs to be expressed in the world to attain the highest good. They contest what the ideal is, but it's very hard to measure. Where Confucianism talks about good relationships and Taoism talks about everything being holistically related, and Mozi talks about a cosmic energy that binds the world together. Those are hard things to actually say how they're working, right? Those are abstract. But the applied approaches accept the world, the phenomenal world, the world of phenomena, and seek to ameliorate it, make it better, preserving what's good that exists and delimiting the negatives which impede it. All right, so they're applied. That's military and medicine. You have to have a result. If the patient dies in medicine, it didn't work. If you lose a military campaign, it didn't work. So it's much more applied. That's a core idea of what I'm looking at. So the tenets of application. In both the military tradition of ancient China and the medical tradition, there is a six-part discourse structure that is parallel to their intellectual paradigm: observation, supposition, abstraction to a principle, the manipulation of that principle, then the application of your plan, and evaluation of result. This is written about strongly in both of those traditions, and it's really a parallel intellectual dynamic. That's what I'm looking at in this ongoing research that I'm doing in this area. So this is a quotation from a book that was canonized in the Tang Dynasty. It's part of the Tang military canons that were then studied in the military academies and were used for advancements in the ranks in the military. You had to memorize them and take tests to work your way up. And so this is between Tang Taizong and Li Weigong, these historical figures, but this is more of like a legendary kind of question-answer Socratic type thing about strategy. And so Tang Taizong says, what was Wu Chi's strategy like? And Ling Qi says to him, permit me to speak about the general points. Marquis Wu of Wei asked Wu Chi about the strategy to be employed when two armies confront each other. Wu Chi said, have some of your low-ranking courageous soldiers go forward and attack. When the fronts first clash, have them flee. When they flee, do not punish them. Observe if the enemy advances to take the bait. If they sit as one and arise as one, and do not pursue your fleeing troops, the enemy has good strategists. If all their troops pursue the fleeing forces, some advancing, some halting, in disorder fashion, the enemy is not talented. Attack them then without hesitation. So this again shows this 6-point idea of how you're testing the real world and applying strategy in application. Now, if we look at the Yellow Emperor's Classic of Internal Medicine, the book Huangdi Neijing, which is a book from the 3rd century BC. And the previous text, although canonized in the Tang Dynasty, is the previous military text actually goes back to the same period, to the ancient period. Okay. The superior physician, it says in the Huangdi Neijing, the superior physician holds to the standing situation, and he reasons the disease cause by analogy, analyzing it through pondering deeply, then treats according to the changing conditions. When he inspects the upper part of the channel, the lower. He cannot hold rigidly to the expectations of the channels in basic theory. So this is from the Suen, the Plain Questions part of this very ancient, very well-revered book on Chinese medicine, part 75, chapter 75. So here again, looking at the real world, what do you really do? You cannot hold to basic theory. This is really the analogous thought process. And I do have a larger paper that's hopefully going to be published in the Proceedings Journal, and has many quotations that show this parallel and show the differences between the abstract philosophies. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about space and boundary. Space seems to be a constant parameter. However, the appreciation of space and its import, how important it is one dimension of the cognitive structure of the world. So different disciplines conceptualize space and the meaning of it differently. And they can compete for an understanding or interpretation of what the facts are, what the actions are. So what this means is there's a distinction between physical location and objective parameters, which would be landscape, or what the locale is like, what it looks like if there's a hill or there's a river or such, and the implication and import of these locations and their relations, which is what I term mindscape or station, what the station is, in other words, what happens when you look at it. So if anyone's been in the military, they know that at first people say, oh, well, there's a little hill, and so what? Then other people who are experienced say that little hill is now cover, a place I can hide behind. What does it mean? So if we look back on some of the ancient books, the military books, they talk about how the general must look at the landscape, but really he means what the interpretation of it is. What can they do with it? What strategic advantage? What advantage does it give? What's the high ground? What's the low ground? What can they do with it? So it is also in medicine. What can you do with different aspects of the body as they change? Okay. So here, the body landscape in medicine. These are traditional terms used in the ancient books. Shunguo, body country, is a term that shows up in ancient medical books, that the body is viewed as a country, for the heart is considered to be the emperor, and the different organs are often considered to be drawn as an analogy to the different roles in society, the general, the minister, and such. So the body's a country. Oh, well, a country has contours, has landscape. The points that we use in acupuncture are actually called shui, caves. They're called caves. They're given landscape terminology. The zones of development, right, are called tian, or fields, such as what we term dantian, which is the field of the elixir or the force that is the core force of the body. But these are fields, using again vocabulary that's of the natural world. Then the term for organs, there's two different types of organs. Solid ones called zang, storehouses, which are places where you lock things up like granaries or like armories, and fu, halls, places where the organs transmit materials through, but the word fu is sometimes translated as hall or palace, for that's where the emperor would work or where the magistrates would work. That is a zang. So all of this is physical vocabulary applied to the body, not describing it in terms of just the bone and the contour and the muscle and the attachment, but describing it like it's a landscape. So that gives rise to cognate vocabulary, vocabulary that is the same in the military tradition and the medical tradition. And one is shu, empty, meaning that it has an opening, emptiness that can be good or bad depending on where it occurs. Shi, substantial, solid, heavy, or ripe. This word also means ripe, ripe for change. These two things juxtaposed to each other. Xing, form, which is a term from the military, the form of the land. And then the shi, the potency or potential or power of what you can do with it. The same thing is applied in medicine. What's the shape and form of the body, and what is the potency or potential to change it? And then the word qi. This is the word for unorthodox, right? This word qi, different than the Chinese medical word qi for a force or metabolic energy. But that word for metabolic energy is also used in military science to use for what is the energy of the weather impacting the land. But this word qi means unorthodox or irregular versus zheng, orthodox or regular. And so in strategy, there's orthodox or regular strategy based on a regular landscape that's dependable, and unorthodox strategy or extraordinary strategy based on a landscape that's unpredictable. In Chinese medicine, those same terms are applied to the meridians, the lines that crisscross the body, and some are considered regular and normal and dependable with 15 different types of predictable points of different classes on them. And the unorthodox ones do not have those 15 classification points. So this vocabulary occurs in both military and medicine. All right, now, Confucianism does have an impact on medicine. We have to mention that. The Confucian tradition, however, uses the term zheng, orthodox or regular, as a dyad with the word heterodox, xie, dissonant or heterodox, and that carries an intrinsic value judgment. But medicine follows this cognate dyad when referring to relationships of the organs, which are analogized to Confucian bureaucratic roles, in other words, the roles and relationship of the organs, how they function correctly or incorrectly. But the military tradition uses orthodox zheng as a dyad with unorthodox qi, which does not carry an intrinsic value. In other words, if the land is unorthodox or irregular, it's not bad, it's just different. Medicine follows this cognate dyad when referring to structures of the body, including organs and meridians, classifying them as either predictable or orthodox and unorthodox. Like the uterus is an unorthodox organ in the Chinese medical terms because it is empty and then is full when someone becomes pregnant, denying a regular classification of what it's like all the time. So this is how we see both these influences. Okay, another term, fa. This is, in the abstract philosophies, fa is an inviolate standard that serves as a measure of the adherence of fallible humanity to ideal principle. In other words, it's the pattern you must conform to. But in the applied philosophies, such as military and medicine, fa represents a strategy or an approach. It's a method which is based on a perception of the intervening factors that shape currently manifested situation. And you have to apply your method, and then judge its result and refine it. Because if it didn't work, then your supposition was wrong. So it's much more flexible in the applied philosophies and much more solid or inviolate in the abstract philosophies. All right, conclusion. What does this mean? So the military and medical traditions of ancient China should be considered as schools of applied philosophy, and therefore very different than the abstract ones. These two traditions developed an analogous cognitive framework. They think the same way. They share a core 6-part discourse approach, as well as central cognate vocabulary. These correlations point to a shared rubric. It underlies these apparently disparate disciplines, because most people think that medicine and military are actually very different. But here, what I'm arguing is that from an intellectual cognitive rubric, they follow the same underlying thought process. So further cross-examination of these traditions can yield a deeper understanding of the internal intellectual constructions that comprise both of them, right? That comprise both of them. So therefore, further study is indicated to then kind of speak to how we can better understand these two traditions that are both ancient and very developed. And in many ways, the medical tradition, of course, of China has survived into the modern day and is practiced all over the world. The military tradition, actually many of the military classics of China are studied around the world. The Sun Tzu Bingfa, which is, we translate as the art of war, is actually studied in the US at the West Point War College. It's studied by the American soldiers who are going to be commanders, and they actually rely on that. So these traditions actually do have vibrancy even in the modern day. All right, so that's the conclusion. That ends my presentation. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and certainly also be very thankful to the organizers of the whole conference who have let us all come together and to speak. Okay, so at that point, I have finished and I beat my time limit, and I'd like to yield the floor to Dr. Zaffarini, who can then present and get her full 15 minutes. All right, thank you.